We are going to be starting our webinar soon. I see attendees starting to come into the meeting, so we're going to hold off for just another couple seconds and welcome everybody and get our party started. Okay, we have a nice crowd. So since it's 7:15, I think we should get going. And I want to welcome you all. Thank you so much. Welcome to the Churchill Borough C1 District Planning and Visioning Project. Thank you for joining the webinar on human well-being. My name is Elaine Kramer, and I'm a community planner with the local consulting firm Pashik MTR. I'm here with Jim Pashik, our firm's founding partner, and Heather Fuller, my colleague, as well as Tess DeYoung from Connect, the Congress of Neighboring Communities. And I'm thrilled to welcome you all, our webinar audience. We hope you're doing well and staying safe these days. And I want to give you a little bit of a slide share here. You should be able to hear me and see me and take a look at this to get some little bit of orientation while we get started. We appreciate your time and interest in the Planning and Visioning Project. In just a minute, we'll introduce our panelists participating in today's discussion. But first, I want to just give you a little orientation to the project. We're here tonight because Churchill Borough decided to undertake a planning and visioning project regarding the future of its Commercial 1 zoning district. Churchill's C1 district is part of the borough that many local residents know as the former Westinghouse R&D site. This visioning project is asking residents of Churchill what you would like to see happen there in the future. The Visioning Project is an outgrowth of Churchill's 10-year comprehensive plan. Back in 2016 and 17, Churchill, along with Monroeville and Wilkins, began the process of creating a multi-municipal comprehensive plan, and that was adopted in 2018. And one recommendation was for Churchill to proactively plan what could happen in this large part of their community, which has had little use for many, many years now. You can see the C1 district, C is commercial and R stands for residential. So that comprehensive plan begat this planning and visioning project. Let me just tell you a little bit about how tonight's webinar fits into the planning and visioning project overall. There's a 6-part webinar series like this one, where you can listen to a planning panel discussion and ask questions of people with expertise in the various topics. There were 2 last week, 2 tonight, and what you see on the slide here are the ones coming up for next week. The panel discussions are designed to help residents learn more about the possibilities of new development at the C1 district and become engaged in the visioning process. Besides this, many of you know about a community questionnaire that you can fill out online or on paper. Go to churchillborough.com or call the borough office to learn more about that. At this webinar, here are some logistics. It is being recorded for later viewing. All 6 webinar recordings will be posted on the borough's website, churchillborough.com. The agenda you see here on the screen shows how we'll be breaking up the time this evening during our webinar. And if you hover your cursor at the bottom of the Zoom window, you should see this black toolbar visible here. So at any point in the webinar, you can ask a question by clicking on that Q&A button, and then writing in your question and then hitting submit. And then when we get to the participant Q&A part of our workshop, which actually will be, I have the wrong slide up, that will be at 8:10, then you'll have the chance to ask those questions. We also wanted to mention that we've taken precautions to prevent Zoom bombing, which can happen. So if there is an interruption, we will quickly just end the webinar if it's something that we deem inappropriate. But that is unlikely, and we are very much expecting and looking forward to a really interesting webinar. So to get started, I'd like to show you a couple of maps that maybe get you oriented to the community a little bit. Here you can see the outline of Churchill Borough, and you know, Penn Hills is up here to the north, Wilkinsburg over here, Forest Hills and Wilkins. Churchill Borough, you know, you can see the residential streets going through here as well as in the surrounding communities. Those are the yellow lines. Little white rectangles are building footprints. So you can see the houses throughout, and then like along Rodi Road going this way, you can see the larger rectangles, which are commercial buildings. You can see the high school here. And then in this area, outlined in purple, is the C1 district, which we're discussing tonight. So here's a blow up, an aerial of that district. All told, it's about 100, just shy of 150 acres. There's two parcels, 133 and 13 acres. You can see it's bounded by the Parkway, Beulah Road, Greensburg Pike, and Lewin Lane. This commercial district, my fun fact is that in the 50s, when this site was developed by Westinghouse, it was intentionally made to look like a locomotive from the air, because one of Westinghouse's, one division of Westinghouse manufactured air brakes for locomotives. And so they wanted visiting executives to know where their headquarters was when they were flying in. And now I'd like to move into panelist introductions, because we have a fantastic group of panelists who have expertise in creating places, conditions, and communities that are wonderful for the people who live, work, or recreate there. And we're so honored that they volunteered to participate tonight. And I'm just absolutely delighted to get to introduce them. Hannah Hardy is the manager for the Chronic Disease and Injury Prevention Program at the Allegheny County Health Department. She's responsible for the community-wide health and wellness campaign called Live Well Allegheny, and activities at the Chronic Disease and Injury Prevention Program, along with the Traffic Safety Education Project and Safe and Healthy Communities Program. Previously, Hannah was Director of Operations and Programming for Let's Move Pittsburgh. She has an 18-year career with nonprofit and local governments in community development, public health, and the environment. She has a master's in public administration from Pitt and a bachelor's from Miami University of Ohio. She's working on her PhD in community engagement at Point Park. You're gonna hit all the universities here before you're finished. Lydia Moran brings over a decade of community building experience to her role as Executive Director of the Congress of Neighboring Communities, which is also known by its acronym CONNECT. Most recently, she spent 3 years leading community engagement and development in the Stowe Rocks area, where part of her mission was shifting neighborhood partners from a competitive mindset to a collaborative one. She was a founding board member of the Etna Community Organization, helping Etna gain national recognition as the world's first eco-district. and she's a contributor to the work of the Tri-Borough Eco District. She spent her first year with Connect, this blew me away, in nearly 600 meetings with leaders of the region, listening to what they had to say about their challenges and collaborations. Dr. James Segedy is a recognized and award-winning leader with expertise in all aspects of managing complex, sustainable community planning and economic development practice and projects. His focus of work that supports best practices, healthy communities, and community quality of life. Jim is Director Emeritus of Community-Based Projects and Professor Emeritus of Planning and Design at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, where he taught for over 21 years. He is co-author of one of the planners' kind of Bible. It's called the Small Town Planning Handbook, published by APA Planners Press. He currently serves as the president of the Edgewood Planning Commission and developed the Allegheny River Towns Project while director of community planning with the Pennsylvania Environmental Council. He's been involved in over 150 planning projects across the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. Jason Wyrick works in pre-construction services, project management, facilities management, and strategic consulting. He has accreditation with LEED and WELL programs, with specialties in existing buildings, operations, and maintenance, and for WELL, the WELL program, building design and construction. He holds a bachelor's from the College of Architecture and Urban Studies at Virginia Tech and an MBA with a focus on corporate sustainability from Duquesne. Jason currently serves as the pre-construction manager for Rycon Construction based in Pittsburgh. There he works with owners, clients, and designers to provide feasibility modeling and construction budget costs. He previously spent 9 years as the Director of Facilities and Sustainability at Phipps Conservatory, striving to transform the historic location into a net zero water and energy campus. While at Phipps, he worked on 4 Living Building Challenge projects and numerous other LEED, WELL, and site certified and award-winning projects. Thank you all so much for being here. What a brain trust. We're really excited. And Jim is going to now jump in and lead the Q&A with our panel.
Thank you, Elaine. So the topic of this webinar is human well-being. And we hope to come at this from 2 different directions. One, what aspects of a site development make a place a good one for people to live, work, and visit or recreate in? That's one. And 2, how can development in a district be done in a way to enhance it as a good place for people to live, work, visit, or spend time? So I'm going to ask all the panelists, but I'm going to start with Hannah. Speaking generally and not about any particular location, what are some characteristics of the built environment that enhance human well-being on an individual basis?
Well, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Thanks for the opportunity to be speaking tonight. I'm pleased. I've worked with both Jim Segedy and Jason Wyrick in previous positions, so it's nice to kind of be here with them in this way. They're certainly both experts in their fields, so I appreciate the opportunity to speak with them. So yeah, I've made my career to public health, so we think a lot about population health, but what population health is made up of is how we're all doing. And so I think that the question relates to individual health. So when we think about the residents of Churchill and what can be done really to, how can we make this site a site that contributes to the overall health of Churchill, but that also improves the health of the individual residents of Churchill. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. I mean, I'm thinking about this in terms of health outcomes, and that is, are we all leading longer, healthier lives? Is there something that this site can do that can contribute to that? So some of my public health speak that I really use, and this came from my work in the environmental field, is that there really are the way that we all behave, how we eat, how physically active we are, whether we smoke or not, that really contributes to those overall health outcomes. And those, at the end of the day, are behaviors. So what are the things that this site can do, whether they're easy behaviors or hard behaviors for us? What are those things that this site can do to help us all to partake in those healthier behaviors? So when I think about that, and I think about healthy communities and the work that we're doing in public health with folks in community development or with the built environment, I really think about those things that promote walkability, that promote being able to have access to fresh, food, fresh food in our community, being able to get where you need to go, perhaps without getting into a car or things like that. So as I came to this discussion tonight, I think it's interesting to think about the whole of Churchill, and then what are those, what do the residents of Churchill, what does the vision for this site, what should the vision for this site be that kind of fills that need? What's already in the whole community, but perhaps what is not there for the residents of Churchill. So that's kind of how I was thinking about it today. I'll kind of stop there so you can move on, but that's, things that, in terms of walkability, access. I know there was another session on connectivity. Those are all those things contribute to me, if I were a resident of Churchill, being able to lead a healthier life.
Thanks, Hannah. Who else would like to add in on that?
If I may,
Jim.
One of the things that I think is very important, Hannah began to touch on, as I would have expected her to. I have the highest respect for her work and who she is taking the idea of connectivity and walkability and so forth to the next level. People need to engage with their community, the areas around it. That's kind of why we have communities, is to be a part of something, to be a part of a place, to create that sense of belonging, that sense of community. And I think that's absolutely critical. And I think Hannah was leading very much into that realm. And I wholeheartedly support that notion.
Thanks, Jim. Jason or Lydia? All right, let me go on to the next question, which is similar. I'll start with Lydia. So speaking generally and not about a particular location, what are some characteristics of the built environment that enhance human well-being on a community basis? I think Hannah was starting to touch on those as well as Jim, but are there some other things that we can be thinking about in terms of the well-being of the community?
Yeah, so I could echo Hannah and Jason or Jim for sure on the walkability. I kind of think of that as mobility and access, or linking that to access, the idea of mobility and transit and linkages to other places you might like to go, but also for people to be able to come into your community and bring activities or commerce, those types of things. I'm really looking at all of this. It'll be hard for me probably not to now, through the lens of eco-districts. So I have an accreditation with eco-districts planning. And when you look at healthy people, you're just thinking you're not gonna have those without a healthy community. And what makes people healthy, what makes people resilient. And those are things like not just the built environment, what's the water quality that you're getting, what's the quantity, are there landslides, are there floods, how does the built environment contribute to those things? Air quality is huge. I don't know if you guys have noticed this lately, but almost every weather app is showing how the air quality is where you are. And so I found it, I have asthma and I've always noticed this, but I'm finding it really underlining that for me when I'm having a hard breathing day, for the weather to also say air quality today is fair, air quality today is poor. And so how does the built environment contribute to air quality? Are you making it easier for people to use public transit? Are you making it easier for people to walk while increasing access? So those are things I think about. And when not talking about a specific place, but in a lot of eco-district models, we talk about water, food, mobility, equity, energy, and just, how are you harnessing those things and, enhancing the strengths of the community in the sort of themes, and then looking at where those, opportunities are to fill in. And I think Hannah spoke to that really well. So
Great.
I'll let others answer.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what's been said by the panel already. Is about connectivity, and the big goal is health outcomes, community and individual, and they're shaped by access, so opportunities to connections within the systems. And I think it's really important to whatever place you're at. It's a sense of place. It's a sense of how you feel. For me, I'm currently looking for a new home and a new community to engage in. And so those things, it's interesting to kind of look at that and look at this site as well as, I'm looking for, equity. I'm looking for a good education system, healthcare system, all those things that kind of play into health. So I look at, what creates a good community and what creates a healthy community. And, it's driven by economics, education, healthcare, looking at equity and reducing discrimination and racism. I think, all those are coming into play when you look at a healthy community. So there's all these different factors that play into that. But I think connection, access is really going to be important for a larger community, positive health outcome.
Great. Thank you. I'd like to ask Jim this, and then anybody else that would like to join in. Still speaking generally, what are some of the characteristics of the built environment that detract from individual human well-being? And what actions can be taken or decisions to avoid those kinds of things, is what I would think. Detract from individual human well-being.
You don't want boring. One of the things you have to understand, I'm a recovering architect as well as all these other things. I still have maintained my certification as a clinical virologist, but I don't talk about that in this day and age. One of the things that I have discovered in my years of doing all these things that I do is people want to interact. They want to be a part of the environment in which they live, work, and play. They want to, when they're walking around, even when they're walking from their car in the parking lot to their place of employment or whatever, they want to look at things that are interesting. They don't want to see a blank wall. Sad to say that on the current Westinghouse site, there are some of those things. It's not particularly interesting. I know one of the things when I first moved here and started working at the Environmental Council, one of the things my wife, who those of you who were in the previous webinar met her, we looked at a site or a house that backed up to this site. And one of the things that discouraged us from buying that property is that it looked at a large blank wall. And no, that to me strikes as the opposite of what we've been discussing, the idea of walkability and engagement and connectivity. You want to be a part of something that you find interesting. And so I think whatever happens on this site, it needs to be engaging to the population. Mental health is something we don't often talk about, and that's very important. You don't want to be in a dull, boring, oppressive kind of place. Even the Allegheny County jail overlooks the water. Good for them. We won't mention about the brownfield underneath it, but that's another story altogether. So I think whatever happens on this site, and part of this is coming from my position after being at the Environmental Council. I was Deputy Planning Director in Peters Township. And we had a large site. It was a former golf course. We also had another site that was kind of underdeveloped. And what did we decide to do with that? We made something that Peters Township did not have. Downtown, a place where people could go and meet and do the kinds of things that people do in a downtown. That, I think, is an important thing. We're seeing that more and more. So, you don't want the strip mall, you don't want the shopping mall, you want something that builds community. And I think those are the kinds of things that we should be striving for, even as, I'll say, small as the Westinghouse site. It's pretty big, but it's still, it's not a whole new place. But it has the potential for being the heart of Churchill.
Thanks, Jim. So I'll ask the same question to you other panelists. What characteristics of the built environment would detract from individual human well-being? Jim's talked about boring places where people cannot connect, where they cannot gather and be part of a community. What other things would you feel would detract from individual human well-being?
I mean, I'd be happy to chat a little bit about go ahead, Jason.
For me, a big thing is access, and being able to visually see somewhere and have a destination to go to. So deterrent fences, grading, certain ways. If you look at really good landscape architecture, you're kind of drawn into certain areas, and somewhere that, you can see and it's safe and I can go and engage there. I think that's really important. And if you don't have those things, that's a deterrent for people really to reduce a healthy place is. So I think just smart visually, and it has to be attractive and kind of whimsical and fun. And I think a challenge to the site is the grading, the grade, and also the legality of the property and risk and liability associated with that too. Is something that is going to deter and make a place worse if that's kind of the driver for how the rules and regulations are set up based on what's going to be developed there.
And Liddy, you were going to say something.
Yeah, so I guess I was going to kind of harp on the visual appeals of lots of cars. So, Churchill is in a place where you probably do need a car a lot of the time, or you feel like you need a car a lot of the time. And this conversation was reminding me of a process that I spent the last 2 years, or last 18 months working on, that Connect spent about 3 years on, which was this transit-oriented development study with about 12 municipalities around the county. And what was really interesting was just how it's not a physical thing, but just if you look at your zoning and your code, those types of things can make a space really hard to give it what it wants. And so when you talk about parking, or you talk about things that you don't want to see, you don't want to approach an attraction by looking at a ton of cars. You either want to find a way to hide those and make the attraction the visually appealing thing. And I don't know exactly where I was going with that, other than play up the visually appealing pieces. But if we can find ways to make people be able to get there without having to make it be a parking lot, right? So parking lot.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lydia.
If I can jump back in for a second.
Please, Jim.
Reinforce what Lydia just said. Something my wife and I say all the time to people. We need to think of these things where we store cars as parking lots. They need to be, as Jason said, they need to be green, they need to be visually interesting and landscaped and everything else. But think of them as a park. And maybe when the cars aren't there, maybe we use greenscape parking systems that will allow other activities to take place, or certainly allow water to permeate through the surface, so it's not just running off and having to be managed through a pipe someplace. But think of it as an extension of the landscape, not an extension of the Parkway East.
Great, thank you.
I wanted to just jump in and highlight two things that Jim said, because he was starting, you know, we've talked about physical health, right? But I do
Yes.
think that in this time right now that we're all experiencing, issues of social isolation and mental health they've always been important, but we're increasingly, I think, becoming publicly aware of them. And I think you also mentioned back in the early part of this discussion, Jim, about placemaking. So it's interesting, if we're doing visioning for this site, what is the place and what could the potential role be for this site for gathering and community space and things like that? So I think that's the people's mental health is directly related to their physical health and their physical health outcomes. So those two things are not separate.
Great, thank you. I'd like to expand the question a little more. We've been talking about how we detract from human individual well-being. Let's step back a little bit and think in terms of how the built environment, they're going to develop this 130 some acres somehow. How can that built environment make things work for the community as a whole now? So think of the system as much larger system. Now we're looking at the community of Churchill instead of the individual. What can go wrong, and what can we anticipate that would negatively affect the community's well-being?
I'd love to my first thought here on this is that not giving the community an opportunity to really be a part of that vision building. I think Hannah alluded to that a little earlier, but I think people who live in the space know most what the space needs and what they need from it. Often inspiration is really key there, and we always say in Pittsburgh, we have to see it to believe it. And I think that's true here. I think a way, a cool strategy to sort of start to begin to vision that with community is, I don't know if this is like too nerdy for planning, but we call it tactical urbanism. And it's a sort of a low risk chance to start exploring what could happen in a space where community can engage around that and contribute to it and give feedback without, putting giant amounts of development dollars into it and having that not work out. And so these are kind of just low cost temporary changes to a built environment or a green space to invite folks in to engage with it and then also give feedback. And so I'm thinking for a space like this, what could go wrong is there's so many potential opportunities there, but if it's not what the community is looking to add as their strengths, and they haven't had a chance to sort of get used to this really big change journey, our brains have to go on when a big change happens in our community, that I think any kind of change needs a little bit of softness to it. But I think this tactile urbanism, their strategy is pop-up parks, holding festivals, and I think these can be done to help gather that vision, and I would suggest that. So biggest thing that can go wrong is that you put something the other community never wanted and never needed. And
I can build on what Lydia said. She's spot on, and I think we've all talked about it a little bit during this session. And we have to not look at this site, this 130 some acres, as a site. It is an integral part of the Churchill community, which is an integral part of the east side of Allegheny County. We need to not have walls between the neighborhoods, the other neighborhoods. There's a Blackthorn and some of the other ones that are in this area. The school is right across the street almost from this site. How can we get those people to go through that barrier, that borderline that was drawn in purple on the map that we saw? We want to have bike trails continue on the sidewalks and make sidewalks in this new development that people can have easy access. If we're going to make it pedestrian friendly, we don't want them to have to drive a mile or 2 miles to get to the site, park their car, and then walk. We want them to be able to have this as an extension of their front yard or their backyard or their front porch or whatever the case may be. So we have to not look at it as the C1 area. We have to look at it as the new heart, perhaps, of Churchill.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts about community well-being as it relates to this future development?
Well, and then just to take Jim's idea, but then how do you zone for that new heart, right? That's probably the question that you all are dealing with right now.
That's next week's panel. I'd like to just take a break for a second, and then we'll continue on with some questions. For those attendees that are participating and watching this, you have an opportunity to ask questions of the panelists, and I'm sure they'd be delighted to respond to them. Just have to click that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, hover over the bottom if it's not showing up, and you'll be able to ask questions. We'd love to take some of your questions on well-being and the community well-being as an individual, and share those questions with the panelists, and I just wanted to remind you to do so. I'd also like to mention that the owner has asked for an opportunity to speak for a few minutes, and we'd like to honor that, and we would make sure that that happens just before the lightning round, and that would be at 8:25. So Ms. O'Neill, I'm giving you a heads up for 8:25. And so I got another question. So well-being, I think we all can agree that well-being is important, both as an individual and community. How does a small borough like Churchill measure well-being? How do they know that they are making progress on having a community or a development that's it has well-being integrated into that development?
Well, I'll jump in on that. One of the things that I think is an easy way of doing this is if people go to the site, people use the site. Engagement, participation, counting numbers, as simple as that, is a way to see if you have done what you set out to do. So I think, that also then includes programming. The site is more than just the physical elements. It's the things that happen there. Schedule events and activities that may happen there. I think that's a very important part of any development practice, is to get people engaged in what they do, not just where they do it, and also how they do it.
Anyone else? How do we measure that?
I mean, there are long-term answers to this question that relate to public health data over time. That's the one, I don't think that should fall on the shoulders for an individual municipality. But I mean, the health department does what's called a behavioral risk factor surveillance survey. And one of the questions is, do you feel like your community is a healthy community? This isn't exact, but do you feel like your community is a healthy place to live? Do you feel like it's improving? Things like that. So there are, you can certainly look at that data. I think that's some indicator. Jason mentioned one, which is, are people being attracted and wanting to move to Churchill? I think that's also a longer term way to evaluate this, but certainly that's one piece of it. With a young family, I know Jason has 2 small kids. If they're wanting to locate in Churchill, that's a pretty darn good sign,
Thanks, Hannah. Who else? So let me go to another question then. I'm going to come back to Jim on this. Let's talk a little bit about redevelopment planning at large sites like the C1 district, which occupies 150 acres in Churchill Borough. There are any number of future possibilities for development of the C1 district. If you imagine different types of future development there, what are some don'ts that you would recommend if the owner, the developer, and the borough all want to make a great place for people? What should you not do? as you plan for the future for this site? Jim?
Well, I think we've already discussed this a bit. We need to not look at it as a single development. We need to look at it as a collection of small activity nodes, neighborhoods, if you will. Sometimes maybe people live in this area. Maybe it becomes an area of small homes, or any number of different choices and options that people may not have in the Churchill or the Churchill area neighborhood. The area, you know, starting from about the Pittsburgh line heading east, excuse me, is pretty much relatively large suburban lot kind of development. I think there's some opportunities for some other things, but still, you know, I hear it all the time. You must maintain property values. We must maintain those things that we're used to. But there's lots of other opportunities in doing this. But I think a mixture of uses that has access to people who want to have urban gardens, people who want to have parks for both passive and active recreation, people who want to have some commercial activity, people who want to have office type things. I think all of those things, a mixed use environment, not only across the 130, 150 acres, but also vertically, there may be some opportunities. I don't think a monoculture, you know, 1 or 2 story thing across the whole site is necessarily the right approach. I think a mixture is visually interesting, and I think it's also efficient. We've talked about multiple times, and I know Jason, this is very near and dear to his heart, is sustainability comes from density to an extent. And I think that needs to be accommodated as well. It doesn't come from one site handles everything. It's got to come from a variety.
Thanks, Jim. How about some of our other panelists? What would you recommend if the owner, the developer, and the borough all want to make a great place for people? What would you recommend they not do or do? Either one.
I think it really needs to be people scale. And we talk about parking and cars. I think it would be, if, you know, something to measure would be how many, if there's increased traffic or increased cars or congestion, that's a negative impact. So I think looking at this process and engaging stakeholders and continuing to make sure that things are kind of human scaled and that connection continues to stay there. And, you know, whatever happens on this site really needs to build capacity and opportunities for Churchill. And so how to have the right process and engage everyone that is a part of the stakeholder, and look at all the systems, not just the site, but the community and the East End, like you were talking about. You know, how do you create that capacity? Because it's a once in a generation kind of development in that area. It can have huge impacts, and so just doing the right thing.
Thank you.
I'm thinking of some lessons learned, and there's actually on our website and on the Port Authority's website this really extensive, you know, transit-oriented development guiding principles.
Right.
I'm sure you've seen it, but some lessons learned to me sticking out from that are, this is more of like kind of this might speak more to some of the questions in the Q&A about coding, and I don't know if you want to go there yet, but just lessons learned where they're in places that maybe felt less walkable after a ton of or less human-centered after a ton of investment was made. There was a lack of coding for architecture and streets. And so, you know, this could mean that buildings are designed without an understanding of what it feels like to even walk around in them. And this can be like real, you know, Jim spoke earlier of that blank wall feeling. And there's like, you know, codes that you can write in for ground floor aesthetic and transparency. And so even if there's a series of different little mini developments in this giant site, trying to keep those all at the highest level of human interaction possible. And then, you know, making provisions for new streets and pedestrian walkways. It is once in a generation, but things change, we evolve, and leaving space for that And for the next generation to have a feeling about it is always a good thing. Maybe don't make it so hard for the next generation to rethink about it.
One of the, if I can build on what Lydia is just saying, articulation of facades. So it looks like not just a single monstrous building, but a series of, say, storefronts or like a row house type of thing with visual interest. And another thing, you know, I absolutely agree with the public transit, mass transit, transit authority type of approach. Walkability, sure. But people are exploring new kinds of transportation as well. Bicycles. Now, if only we knew somebody like Hannah, who is involved with developing things like the Great Allegheny Passage and knows her way around trails like nobody's business, I think we've got great potential there. There's all kinds of opportunities to build bicycle commuter ways. We're close to Oakland and the Pitt campus and the Carnegie Mellon campus and all that kind of stuff like that. This is a destination. You know, think of this site as a place that people go to rather than go through.
Yeah, and I think what you're alluding to, Jim, is that there's great efforts right now in connecting bikeways and trails and parks throughout the county. And I think, you know, to not take advantage of that opportunity to partner in connectivity would be silly. And then the last thing that I was going to say was just not enough pedestrian protections throughout the development. And the same goes for bikes. You know, you'd want to make sure that there's walkways across, like if you know there's going to be a natural kind of deer path across a green space, put the path in and, you know, encourage people to use it. Those are the kind of things I'm thinking about.
And even the possibility of developing blue trails. You know, we're going to be looking, you know, that site has a fair amount of topography on it. And, you know, water is going to flow. What if we use that water to direct? You know, we can use it for a lot of different things besides just moving water off of the parking lot. We can use that as a visual and a recreational amenity, perhaps. Within the site, you can use it for green infrastructure and blue infrastructure in a variety of ways.
And there's a lot of opportunity around that right now as well. You know, I don't know what flooding is like in Churchill per se, but in neighborhoods that there are, there's a lot of green infrastructure and grow grants available through Alcosan that, you know, municipalities can take advantage of. And one thing I love about my community that used to flood all the time and ruin everything was that they created a wonderful nature trail that was where there would have been, like, you know, a developer really wanted to put houses there, and the municipality stood up and said, no, we cannot set up families to live through flooding again, but we can create an amenity for the whole neighborhood that they can walk out of their house to and walk along a beautiful water feature. Like the other morning I was there and I saw a heron and baby deer and goslings, and I'm in the middle of an urban area. And I thought that was really cool. And I think Jim, that's a great point. What can we do with water and integrate it throughout?
I'm watching an osprey outside my window as we speak.
One thing, you know, we're talking about health and well-being, and there have been some questions in the Q&A related to air quality and climate change and things like that. And this is more, I think, in Jason's area of expertise. But in this region, we have a lot of experts as it relates to just really high environmental standards for whether it's built or natural environment. So if there are, you know, maybe there's a way to build that into the vision that does contribute to the overall health and well-being of Churchill and the region. But there are those very high levels from the eco district, but then also the other certifications and living, building, and all of those things that we consider.
Thank you. So I have a question that's for all is, I think we've already been touching on these questions. You've been so wonderful that you've been anticipating and answering my questions before I give them. But how does social engagement in community spaces like a plaza or a coffee shop or a park create enhanced well-being? What is it that makes that well-being, human well-being?
I'll jump in on that one. That was what my dissertation was about, all those many years ago. Think about that, Hannah, as you're writing yours. One of the things that I think is absolutely critical is people want engagement. They want to be surprised. They want to find something new and interesting and different, and they like the texture not only of surfaces, vertical, horizontal, but the texture of activities. Sometimes they want to see big things going on, like a football game, which they can do more or less up the road at the high school. They can see little things, street performers or food carts and things like that. We need to be able to make those things a part of the physical design, and so that the physical design accomplishes those types of things and allows them to happen and get people engaged in those types of things. I think that's critical. I'm not sure if I really answered the question, but I want to keep harping on that particular point. We want diversity of people and activities and so forth, because sometimes you feel like a nut and sometimes you don't.
Great, thank you, Jim. Anyone else?
What was the question again?
So it's, how does social engagement in community spaces, like a plaza, a coffee shop, or a park, create enhanced well-being? What is it that makes it well-being?
Well, I think Hannah spoke a little bit to it, but just being able to interact with other humans on some level, for most people, makes them feel a little better, just to know that they're not alone. And so if you're, the mental health and the physical health is so connected, and I just want to kind of tee up Hannah for a more articulate answer on this.
I mean, what's running through my mind, which is actually more related to my just very personal research, is think about a community. I mean, there is research that connects communities that struggle with vacant land and abandoned properties. I mean, that's connected to people's their blood pressure. Like, it's not, I think that really impacts somebody's physical health. So if you think about it from that perspective, that, living in a community where you don't feel safe, where you don't have a place to walk around, like that has a clear negative impact on your health. That's, I guess, how I was thinking about answering your question, Jim, that just makes it all the more reason to do something different here, and then to think about what the potential is, the positive benefits, because this is a beautiful site. I mean, it is a beautiful site. It seems like the opportunities are endless to accomplish several things. So that's how I was thinking about it.
Great, thank you. We're at 8:10, and that's when we hope to begin answering some of these questions. Hannah mentioned that she was noticing some of the questions that were coming in from the attendees, and I wanted to see if Heather could share some of those questions.
Yeah, someone has asked how we can incorporate climate action priorities into the zoning, also suggesting that the school district across the street could be involved as the kids work on climate action.
We start with Jason, huh?
Yeah, I think, it's the developer's going to follow the zoning requirements, right? And what those goals are. I think definitely look to best practices and, high level in regards to sustainability, in regards to water and energy. And I think looking to those best practices and trying to find what might be a good fit for this group. But I think, I like the idea of engaging with the students. Students are forming their climate action, different planning, engaging with them. I've worked on a few projects where we've engaged with the youth in regards to a problem or a project, and you get some really great ideas and you get people engaged, and people that are working on the project get inspired by them. Some of those things that do come out of those workshops end up sticking with the project the whole time. So I think it's really important to think differently and set the bar high in regards to sustainability or how, you know, how we approach the project is really going to be important. But it really is going to be driven by the requirements or what the zoning is. And you know, if there's no goal, you're gonna really lower the bar in regards to looking how this site could you know, catalyze different thinking about climate change and climate action in different generations.
I think Jason's made some great points, and one of the things that I mean, you can write ordinances, you can write all kinds of, you know, guidelines and so forth to make this happen. You can put into zoning code and so forth. You can put in things like impervious surface ratio. You can put in tree planting requirements. You can put in runoff requirements. You can put in sidewalk and those kinds of requirements. You know, require that that you must have X number of indigenous plants planted on site and things of that nature. There's a lot of those things that can be easily written into the ordinances, or at least the covenants, depending on how this gets structured. But I think there's a lot of those opportunities that can be easily written in. You know, I look, one example that those in the Churchill audience may want to look up is Prairie Crossing in Grays Lake, Illinois, in which by the code, the covenants that they have there, that you can expend no more than $250 a year in energy bills per household. And it can be done if you do it right. It requires good design up front. That's where people like Jason are going to come in and say, okay, we're going to make this commitment to say that we're going to do this and we're going to do this. And, you know, in the first 6 years, one of my former students was the project manager for that project. And in the first 6 years, not one person exceeded the $250 heating and cooling bill, and they were selling 4,000 plus square foot homes. So that, you know, it can be done. That's how, you know, at the lowest level, at the individual family level, is where the green, the sustainability and so forth starts best. Is getting people to change their mindset and giving them the tools to make that happen.
Jim, I'm so glad you brought up energy. I was thinking the same way. I think there's a lot of opportunity around health with energy. Two things on that. A little fun fact is that the average household spends between 3 and 5% of their income on energy. And so there could be a huge marketable opportunity in energy efficiency here. It's also a huge space that seems to get a lot of sunlight. And we were talking, Jason was answering a little bit of a question about, you know, engaging youth, and solar and art kind of go together. You can get really interesting with solar. You can get really interesting with sort of teaching about solar with students. So there could be opportunities here to both kind of produce cleaner energy for the park and also educate and kind of bring the new generation up with solar while engaging artists and making it all very visually interesting and appealing. So yeah, trying to maximize renewable energy production on the site, like how much of it could be its own grid would be a really interesting thing to think about. And, you know, it could potentially leverage initiatives to build community wealth there. So there could be some good stuff happening.
Ooh, they could sell excess energy.
You could, and you know, you got a lot of neighbors who also need energy, and all along those lines, I do think solar, there's been some really interesting stuff happening with solar. It's becoming more and more efficient, but also it's so much cleaner inside the home. A study just came out that homes with gas stoves are much more likely to have children with asthma. I think it was like 40% more likely. So inside the home, the energy that you get really affects the health of the community inside too. And so I was just thinking, what can you do about having different energy sources and not having 40% of the children that live in this community have asthma?
Hey, Heather, do you have some other questions?
Yeah, we've talked a bit about why it's important to have coffee shops or entertainment areas and gathering spaces, but how can the Churchill residents ensure that there will be this kind of development on the site?
Okay, I'll jump in. All you have to do is ask the people who live there, what do they want? If they drink coffee, make it convenient and easy for them to stop by and get some. Make it easy to stop by and do all the convenience shopping that they want. Make it easy and convenient. You know, one example, I'm going to go back to that Prairie Crossing in Grays Lake, Illinois. They have a 160-acre working farm in the middle of this 600-acre community. The scales are different, I understand. But the working farm produces virtually all of the food that the community needs. So we could integrate the healthiness of fresh, locally grown produce, and they also have aquaculture there in the lake that's in the middle of this that they also provide. Not only can you have recreational fishing, but you can have food fishing there as well. So, you know, you can pretty much guess, and it wouldn't take much to do a simple market analysis to see what is nearby, which quite honestly is not a lot in that area, and what do people want to do. You know, doing the simple analysis, you know, market analysis will tell you, gee, we don't, you know, we're pretty close to a food desert over in that part of town. Maybe, you know, something easy to get at, food, coffee, as was mentioned, you know, those kinds of things. That's what you put in downtown Westinghouse, whatever, downtown C1, whatever you want to call that. Because, you know, if you look at that zoning map that we saw right at the beginning, there's an awful lot in ours, one big C and a whole bunch of roads, not much else. Those people have to go someplace to get what they need.
Heather, do you have any more questions?
Yeah, we've touched on air quality a bit. Someone has asked, stating that Churchill is at the top of the hill near the Mon Valley. How do we maintain our better air quality and also contribute to improving the region's air quality?
I think some of that goes back to the discussion that we've had about sustainability and some of the things that we've talked about as it relates to different energy and sustainability practices.
Absolutely.
Heather, do you have another one?
Nope, that's it for now.
So this might be a good time, Elaine, to do the poll. Did I catch you unawares?
No, I was just muted.
Elaine is always ready.
Yeah.
Not always. So this is a poll asking your priorities for well-being at the C1 site. If the development included any type of amenities or uses that could enhance well-being on a human scale, what would your first choice be?
Oh, they won't let us vote.
No, sorry, this is for the participants. I hope they start jumping in. Is that, can everybody see it? Okay, yeah, they're starting to answer. I was worried that I hadn't shared it right. So we'll let this up for another few seconds. I don't want to cut people off. I know there's a lot to read there to make your choices. Okay. So I'm going to share the results.
Interesting.
So it looks like a lot of people were interested in places to go and things to do that they feel like that would add to their individual and community well-being, human well-being. And then, yeah, the second highest choice would be some use that includes residential that might have the kind of density or other options that would attract young people to live in the borough. Cool.
Thank you, Elaine.
Any surprises there?
The walking trails being on the low side is somewhat surprising to me, but then again, everyone I know that lives in that area, they already walk a lot. So they don't need necessarily more, they already do it.
All righty, let me close that out. And I think we're 2 minutes away, so I think I'll just go ahead. Tess, would you unmute Ms. O'Neill and invite her to make a statement for the owner, representing the owner, please?
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Rachel O'Neill, and I work for Reed Smith LLP, and we represent the owner of the property at issue here, Churchill Crossings. We've submitted our objections to this process for failure to meaningfully integrate the owner, which has been reiterated in a prior statement and in a letter that was submitted today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So if you would mute, there you go. So what we've done in the other webinars is that Ms. O'Neill has submitted a written document that we will make part of the record of this webinar. So that's included. So we're now to what we call the lightning round, which is kind of a fun name for something, but in other webinars, people have really enjoyed this. And so what we're looking for the panelists to do, and we're going to be looking for lots of different ideas, is to help us identify key words or phrases that best illustrate the ideas we have been discussing. So it's a little bit repetitive, but if you could help us boil this down to a few key words or phrases, that would be really special, because we are working on a vision, and that's what a vision is comprised of. Partway through this, we're going to ask attendees to add their words. So attendees, as we start to go through and develop this list, if you could please submit in the Q&A function any other additional words or phrases that you've heard or think should be added to the list. We would love that as well. So I'm going to start with Hannah, and I'm going to ask her to give me a word or a short phrase that illustrates one thing that's really important to you about what we've been talking about in terms of well-being.
I would say walking.
Great, thank you. Lydia.
I was going to say sidewalks.
All
Come back to me.
righty. Jim.
Diverse activity.
Diverse activity. So Jim, help me understand, because that could mean a million different things. What are you thinking of as diverse activity? Yeah, you want it to be everything.
Yes, I want it to be everything. For passive recreation, active recreation, gathering, shopping, commercial, all those things.
Great, thank you. Jason, a word or phrase?
So just to jump in back on Jim, I wrote down texture activity, and I think that really fits well. But I think it's also important to, capacity building and opportunities.
So what do you mean by capacity building? Because that can mean several different things.
I think for me, it's a lift of Churchill and the community.
Yes.
And that can be measured in many different ways.
Such as?
Positive health impacts or
Yep.
Things. I would say, creating a sense of place as well.
Yeah. So that could be a new line there.
Identity for Churchill.
Inclusion, and that could mean all different types of mobility and access.
Ooh.
And then
Okay, you're gonna have to slow down so she can catch up. There's inclusion. All right, keep going.
Oh, and access, inclusion and access.
Thank you.
But I thought we also talked about gathering around food. I thought that
Yes.
was a piece.
Food is always good.
Energy. I mean, speaking to the legacy of innovation, can Churchill innovate on energy?
Yep.
And then you could put sustainability too.
Yeah, why can't they be the best practice for other communities?
No reason they can't. Visually attractive. Like all of us.
Someone has added sense of place integration. Let's figure out a better way to say this, but sense of place integration between development and the existing residential community.
Ooh. Yeah.
So you're integrating
Good
development
transition.
and the existing community. Yeah. So
So
there's
good
a,
transitions.
integration might be a perfect word for that. Sense of place.
Yes.
Nicely said. Somebody brought up walking again. It's really important. So what else? This is a short list. I was really counting on lots from you guys.
I would say a destination.
Good answer.
Along those lines, connectivity, with your neighbors, you got Forest Hills nearby, make it a place
Yeah.
you don't want to get to and be, and make it easy for that to happen.
What are some other thoughts?
We talked about water.
Yeah.
Is there ways to help with water issues if there are any?
Yeah, and creating amenities from those water systems.
Ooh, good answer.
We talked about biking.
Let's get the, okay, you got amenities, water, biking, go ahead. Do we have any other
Dog
ideas?
Dog park.
from,
A dog park. Place to exercise our fur kids.
Yeah, creating routines too. Making it a place that you want to be part of your routine. And
Oh, yeah. I like the way these people think.
tradition, maybe we always go watch the sunset at the top of the hill.
Oh, I like that.
Or someone else mentions that Churchill was founded in 1934 and was built around the Edgewood Country Club. And so there's just a history to at least be aware of.
I love that Highland Park used to be the Highland Park Country Club, and now it's so accessible to so many.
Yeah.
I was wondering where the Edgewood Country Club was. I've lived in Edgewood since I've been here, and I haven't found it yet. Now I have.
What other things should we add to the list?
We didn't talk about this a lot, and this is probably more of the sense of place conversation, but signage and exercise equipment that sort of engages you to, helps people understand the culture of the place and, lets people be a part of it.
And interpretation. That goes with the heritage as well.
Right.
Access
Someone has added.
to public services.
Sorry, Jim, I cut into you. What did he say?
Good access to public services, police, fire, health, all that type of stuff.
Someone has submitted the idea that we have super view of downtown Pittsburgh from a cemetery. So that's an asset that we ought to capitalize.
I know. I watched the Pittsburgh fireworks from my back deck.
I also want to point out the comment of the legacy of innovation. And, when I think of Westinghouse, I'm referring to some things that people said earlier this evening. And when you all have talked about sense of place, I've wondered about marrying the legacy of innovation with any future development. And that builds on one of our comments was the innovation legacy, and I'm guessing that's where that person's going.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Hey, you're not that far from the universities and Bakery Square, so why couldn't this become an extension of that innovation? What other things?
I think we talked a little bit about the population that lives there now. And I can't help thinking of, walking around the public parks in China, there were so many organized exercise opportunities for senior citizens. And I think, we talked about those public services, but maybe also those more organized social services that are pretty low cost, low risk, high impact that happen inside a space like this.
Yes.
Birding.
That activates the space that Jim talks about.
Yeah,
Right.
Birding, wildlife.
Yeah.
There are opportunities there.
Let's think also more broadly about, we don't know what will happen, what kind of development will occur in this place. So let's think of some other ideas. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are for making a good place for people, if it's not simply a natural environment, but if it's, if other types of development occur there, like more intensive development.
So I was thinking this was going to be intensive environment and that you would be able to play up natural environment within it, making room for pedestrians, emphasizing trees, complete streets. I never thought that it would just be a park.
Yeah.
That high value space.
Yeah, I wanted just to hear more thoughts about that, about hear where you all were going with that.
Well, human scale, maybe that mentioned.
I like Lydia bringing up complete streets, and someone earlier brought up I think it was Lydia brought up tactical urbanism. I think opportunities for change to be initiated by the local citizens, which is what tactical urbanism encourages.
So a huge piece of the eco-district planning is really getting to know the citizenry and what their, hopes and dreams are. Are there entrepreneurs living there that, are a step away from opening a business and never considered Churchill because why would they right now? Or, not why would they, but there's not a Main Street there and they want a Main Street type business. So who's there that wants to do stuff now? I think throughout our process, we ended up finding someone who really wanted to open a coffee shop, and she did. And that was kind of neat. So, who lives here now that wants to make Churchill a new business opportunity?
Such great ideas.
Yeah, I wonder if I could just ask one last question that's not related to this list. And we've talked a little bit about it, but I just would like to be explicit in my question is, how could the borough integrate a sense of human well-being into their land use regulations? We've talked big picture kinds of things, but and Jim kind of skirted around a little bit about stormwater and energy efficiency and stuff, but ultimately, if we want some of these characteristics of development that includes well-being as a concept, how do we do that with land use regulations?
Well, there's probably not enough time to kind of go into this whole thought process, but, in my field, we talk a lot about health in all policies. And so what that means is it's like a collaborative approach to improving health, really by considering the health implications as part of policy-making decisions. So that's, there is a stepwise process whereby, and you can do this for developments or if you're implementing a new policy, it's a way to think about the health of people first. And so that could be an area to really delve into a little bit as part of the development of this site. Some of that could happen now, some of it could happen later when it's closer to the development. There are very tangible things like health impact assessments that can look at different, the different outcomes and what could happen. But, just thinking about health in all policies and thinking about putting that lens of health and thinking about people when you're making decisions is one way to do that. And there are a lot of resources out there to do that, that would be a merging of public health and planning and all of those things.
And that's a very different approach than historic development.
And I think there are studies that totally back it up that healthy people make healthy economies, right? And so this isn't just about the feel-goodness of being healthy. It's also about creating a healthy economy in a space.
I'm going to reveal my planning nerdness. One of the things, is integrate performance-based zoning criteria. Performance zoning itself doesn't work well, but including performance-based types of considerations, I think, is certainly well worth considering. We did that in Peters Township, and it was very helpful in us achieving our goals down there.
Great.
Of Peters Township zoning, so I think that's what we're looking into.
Say again. I didn't hear what you said, but we'll continue this conversation later.
So I would like to thank everybody. We're just about done, and you guys have done a terrific job. I'd like to thank the panelists. I think everyone would agree. You guys are amazing. I don't know how we got such great panelists to help, and you all volunteered your time, and it is amazing what you've done to enhance the project we're doing in terms of creating a vision for the C1 district in Churchill. So thank you very much for what you've done to contribute to this webinar. I'd like to thank the attendees. You've really added to it with your questions and answers, and it seems like we're still getting some comments even now, and we'll make sure that we record all of that is part of the record for this as we go forward. So thank you for participating in this session. This session has been recorded, as well as the whiteboard that we've done, and that will become part of the record and will be posted on the Churchill Borough website. So anyone who wants to go back and look at human wellness will be able to take a look at the discussion that we had today. I hope you will join us next week, next Wednesday, May 13th, as we do our last two webinars. The first one will be on building codes and standards and regulations. The second one will be on the marketplace. And we have some great panelists for both of those sessions as well. So I want to thank you very much for being part of this webinar, and especially a thank you to the panelists. It was really a great conversation. It was terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
We'll be in touch.